The fluorescent light above Platform 3 flickered twice at 11:47 p.m., and Marcus Chen knew immediately that something was wrong. Not because of the light itself, the entire Bellmont Station was falling apart, built in 1923 and barely maintained since, but because of the sound that followed. A low, metallic grinding like train wheels on rusted tracks, even though the last passenger train had left 6 hours ago. Marcus gripped his flashlight tighter and pulled out the crumpled sheet of paper from his shirt pocket. Rule number 4. If you hear train sounds after 11:30 p.m., do not investigate. Return to the security office immediately and lock the door. His supervisor, Dale, had handed him this list on his first day 3 months ago with a grim expression and the warning, "These aren't suggestions, kid. Follow them exactly, or you won't make it to morning." The grinding sound grew louder, accompanied by something that made Marcus's skin crawl, the faint echo of voices, as if dozens of people were having conversations just beyond his hearing. The temperature dropped so suddenly, he could see his breath, and the smell hit him, coal smoke mixed with something else. Something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Welcome back to another true horror story from the night shift. I'm sharing this because I need people to know what really happens in places like Bellmont Station. If you're watching this alone in the dark, maybe turn on some lights. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Hit that like button if you're brave enough to hear what I experienced, and subscribe, because there are more stories where this came from. Trust me, you'll want to stay updated on what lurks in Ohio's forgotten places. The voices were getting clearer now, and Marcus realized with growing horror that they weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking any language he'd ever heard. 3 months earlier, Marcus Chen had been desperate enough to take any job that paid more than minimum wage. Fresh out of community college with a criminal justice degree that seemed increasingly worthless, he'd answered a Craigslist ad for night security personnel, Bellmont Station Historic Preservation Society. The pay was surprisingly good, $18 an hour for what seemed like babysitting an empty train station. Bellmont Station sat on the outskirts of Millerville, Ohio, a town that had seen better days when the steel mills were still running. The station itself was a monument to better times, with its grand arched windows and ornate ironwork, though most of the windows were now boarded up and the ironwork had turned the color of dried blood with rust. During the day, it served as a modest museum and event space. At night, it became Marcus's responsibility. The job seemed straightforward enough. Walk the perimeter every 2 hours, check that the doors were locked, make sure nobody was trying to vandalize the property or use it for drug deals. The Bellmont Station Historic Preservation Society had been fighting to keep the place from being demolished for years, and break-ins were apparently a constant problem. What they needed was someone to be a visible presence to keep the troublemakers away. Marcus lived alone in a studio apartment 20 minutes away, had no girlfriend, and spent most of his free time playing video games or reading true crime forums on Reddit. The night shift actually suited him perfectly. He was naturally nocturnal, and the solitude didn't bother him. His parents had moved back to California after his father's plant closed, leaving him as one of the few young people left in a town that seemed to be slowly dying. The first 2 months had been exactly what he'd expected. Quiet, boring, occasionally interrupted by teenagers trying to sneak in to drink beer, or couples looking for a romantic spot to park. He'd developed a routine: arrive at 10 p.m., walk the building, settle in the security office to read or watch Netflix on his phone, make his rounds every 2 hours, leave at 6 a.m. when the day staff arrived. But there had been small things even from the beginning. Sounds that didn't quite make sense: footsteps on platforms when no one was around, doors that he could swear he'd locked standing slightly ajar. Cold spots in certain areas of the building that his breath would fog in even during Ohio's humid summer nights. Shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. Dale Morrison, the grizzled maintenance supervisor who'd hired him, had always been cagey about the building's history beyond the standard tourist information. Built in 1923, served passenger trains until 1979, briefly used for freight until 1995, then abandoned until the Historical Society took it over in 2008. But Marcus had started to suspect there was more to the story, especially after he'd found old newspaper clippings in the office filing cabinet mentioning incidents and unexplained accidents dating back decades. The building felt wrong at night. Not just old or creepy, but fundamentally wrong, as if something had happened there that had left a permanent stain on the place. Everything changed on a Tuesday in September when Marcus arrived for his shift to find Dale waiting for him in the parking lot smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. The older man's face was pale, and he kept glancing at the station's main entrance as if expecting something to emerge. "There's something I need to tell you, kid," Dale said, crushing his cigarette under his boot. "Should have done it sooner, but I was hoping. Well, doesn't matter what I was hoping. Things are getting active again." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, creased and worn as if it had been handled many times. "These are the rules. Real rules, not the bullshit safety manual corporate gave you. Follow them exactly, or..." He paused, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Let's just say we've had to replace night guards before." The paper contained 7 rules written in Dale's careful handwriting. Night security rules. Bellmont Station. Never enter the old ticket booth between midnight and 3 a.m. If you see a woman in 1940s clothing on platform 2, do not make eye contact or speak to her. The storage room in the basement locks from the outside only. If you hear knocking from inside, ignore it. If you hear train sounds after 11:30 p.m., do not investigate. Return to security office immediately. Count the security cameras on your monitor every hour. There should be 8. If there are 9, do not look at the extra feed. Never follow anyone wearing a conductor's uniform. They are not supposed to be here. If someone asks you for help finding the last train, tell them it already left and walk away. Marcus had stared at the list, sure Dale was either pranking him or having some kind of mental breakdown. "What kind of bullshit is this? Is this some hazing thing?" Dale's expression had been deadly serious. 3 guards quit in the last 2 years. 4th one. Well, we found him in the morning, but he wasn't right after that. Keeps talking about the passengers, about how they're still waiting. He's in a facility now. "You're telling me this place is haunted?" Marcus had laughed, but it sounded forced even to his own ears. "I'm telling you to follow the rules if you want to keep this job and your sanity." Dale had started walking toward his truck, then turned back. "And Marcus, if something feels wrong, if every instinct you have is telling you to run, then run. Don't be a hero. This place, it's got a hunger to it." That night, Marcus had tucked the paper into his shirt pocket, telling himself it was just the old man's way of dealing with a creepy building. Every old building had stories, urban legends that got passed down and embellished. He'd grown up hearing about the supposedly haunted houses and abandoned factories around Millerville. This was just more of the same. But at 11:47 p.m., when that fluorescent light flickered and the sound of phantom trains filled the empty station, Marcus realized that Dale hadn't been trying to scare him. He'd been trying to save him. The grinding sound of metal on metal grew louder, and through the station's high windows, Marcus could see lights, the warm yellow glow of train car windows passing by the platform. But that was impossible. The tracks outside had been torn up 15 years ago, replaced by a walking trail that the city had built to attract tourists. Marcus fumbled for his radio to call Dale, but all he got was static. His cell phone showed no signal, though it had been working fine 20 minutes earlier. The voices were becoming clearer now, dozens of overlapping conversations in what sounded like a mix of time periods. A woman's laugh from the 1940s. A man discussing stock prices from what could have been the 1960s. Children singing a song he didn't recognize. The lights from the phantom train cast moving shadows through the station's interior, and in those shadows Marcus began to see shapes. People, passengers, waiting on benches that had been removed decades ago, carrying luggage that flickered in and out of existence. His hands shaking, Marcus pulled out the rule list and read rule number 4 again. If you hear train sounds after 11:30 p.m., do not investigate. Return to security office immediately and lock the door. But as he turned to head back to the office, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Standing at the far end of platform 2 was a woman in a navy blue dress with the kind of padded shoulders and narrow waist that screamed 1940s fashion. Her hair was perfectly styled in finger waves, and she was holding a small suitcase. She was staring directly at him. Rule number 2. If you see a woman in 1940s clothing on platform 2, do not make eye contact or speak to her. Marcus quickly looked away, but not before he caught sight of her face. It was beautiful, perfectly made up with red lipstick and kohl-rimmed eyes. But there was something wrong with it, something that made his brain rebel against what he was seeing. Her skin had a waxy quality like a mannequin, and her smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. The phantom train whistle blew long and mournful, and Marcus ran. The security office door slammed behind Marcus, and he immediately turned both locks, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the small window, he could still see the glow of the phantom train, but the sounds were muffled now, distant. His breathing slowly returned to normal as he slumped into the desk chair, the rule sheet crumpled in his sweating palm. For the rest of that shift, Marcus stayed locked in the office, jumping at every small sound. When 6 a.m. finally arrived and Dale showed up with the morning maintenance crew, Marcus was ready to quit on the spot. But something stopped him, maybe pride, maybe curiosity, or maybe the fact that $18 an hour was more than he'd ever made in his life. "Rough night?" Dale asked, noting Marcus's haggard appearance. "I saw her. The woman on platform 2. Dale nodded grimly. "Did you follow the rules?" "Yeah, I didn't make eye contact." "Well, not for long." "Good. That's why you're still here." Dale poured himself coffee from the pot Marcus had made around 4 a.m. "It gets easier once you know what to expect. The first encounter is always the worst." Over the following weeks, Marcus began to understand the rhythm of Bellmont Station's supernatural activity. Most nights were quiet normal, but roughly once a week, usually when the atmospheric pressure was dropping before a storm, the phantom train would arrive. Sometimes it was just sounds and lights. Other times, passengers would disembark and wander the platforms for hours before disappearing at dawn. Marcus learned to recognize the signs: a sudden drop in temperature, the smell of coal smoke and old perfume, his radio crackling with voices speaking in decades-old slang. When those signs appeared, he would retreat to the security office and wait it out, following the rules religiously. But the rules themselves began to feel insufficient as Marcus encountered phenomena not covered by Dale's list. There was the night he found muddy footprints leading from the main entrance to platform 3, where they simply stopped. The prints were made by dress shoes that would have been fashionable in the 1950s, and they were still wet despite the fact that it hadn't rained in weeks. There was the evening when all 8 security camera feeds showed the same image: an empty waiting room, even though Marcus could see with his own eyes that he was looking at different areas of the station. When he mentioned this to Dale, the older man just added an addendum to the rules. "If all camera feeds show the same image, do not trust what the cameras show. Use only visual confirmation until 6 a.m. The worst incident happened on a Thursday night in October. Marcus was making his 2 a.m. rounds when he noticed that the door to the storage room in the basement was standing open. According to the rules, that room was supposed to lock from the outside only, but there it was, gaping like a mouth in the dim hallway. Cool air flowed from the opening, carrying the scent of mildew and something else. Something that reminded Marcus of funeral flowers. He approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, and peered inside. The storage room was larger than he'd expected, stretching back into shadows that his flashlight couldn't penetrate. Stacks of old furniture and equipment created a maze of passages, and from somewhere deep in the room came a sound that made his skin crawl, a wet, rhythmic tapping like someone drumming their fingers on glass. Marcus reached for the door handle, intending to close and lock it, when a voice called out from the darkness, "Help me, please. I'm lost." It was a woman's voice, young and scared, with an accent that suggested she'd grown up in Ohio, but decades earlier. Every instinct Marcus had screamed at him to investigate, to help whoever was trapped in there. But rule number 3 was clear. The storage room in the basement locks from the outside only. If you hear knocking from inside, ignore it. The voice called out again, closer now. "Please, I can see your light. I've been trapped down here so long. I just want to go home." Marcus forced himself to close the door and turn the key, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage it. The woman's voice rose to a shriek of frustration and rage that followed him all the way back to the security office, and for the rest of the night, he could hear intermittent pounding from the basement as if someone was trying to break down the door from the inside. When Dale arrived in the morning, Marcus told him what had happened. The older man went down to check the storage room and returned 10 minutes later, his face pale. "Room's empty," Dale said. Always has been. We cleaned it out when we took over the building. Nothing but dust and spider webs. Then who was... Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, Dale interrupted. Just follow the rules. But Marcus was beginning to realize that the rules weren't just about avoiding ghostly encounters. They were about something much worse. The more nights he spent at Bellmont Station, the more he understood that whatever haunted the place wasn't just residual energy from the past. It was intelligent, adaptive, and actively hunting. The phantom passengers weren't just replaying old memories. They were aware of him, watching him, learning his patterns. He'd started to notice the same faces appearing night after night. A businessman in a 1960s suit who always stood near the ticket window, a young mother with a child who never aged, an elderly man in overalls who would tip his cap whenever Marcus passed by. And they were getting bolder. The woman in 1940s clothing had appeared 3 more times, each time standing a little closer to the security office. The businessman had started following Marcus during his rounds, always staying just at the edge of his peripheral vision. The elderly man had begun speaking, offering cryptic warnings about the last train and settling old debts. Most disturbing of all was the realization that the rules weren't comprehensive. Dale had been adding to them regularly, updating the list as new phenomena emerged, which meant that whatever was happening at Bellmont Station was evolving, growing stronger, finding new ways to interact with the living world. Marcus began to research the station's history in earnest, spending his off days at the local library and historical society. What he found made him understand why Dale looked so haggard, why previous security guards had quit or suffered mental breakdowns. Bellmont Station hadn't just been a train depot. Between 1923 and 1979, it had been the site of 17 documented deaths, suicides, accidents, and 3 murders that were never solved. But the unofficial death toll was much higher. Local newspaper archives were filled with stories of disappearances, people who had purchased tickets but never reached their destinations, passengers who had simply vanished between stations. The most disturbing discovery was a series of reports from the 1950s describing what locals called ghost trains, phantom locomotives that would appear on foggy nights, picking up passengers who were never seen again. The reports had been dismissed as urban legends at the time, but Marcus was beginning to understand that they documented something much more sinister. Bellmont Station wasn't just haunted. It was still operating, still collecting passengers for journeys to destinations that existed somewhere outside normal space and time. And based on the increasing frequency of supernatural activity, Marcus was beginning to suspect that the station was preparing for its busiest night in decades. The night everything went wrong started like any other. Marcus arrived at 10 p.m. to find the station quiet and normal, with no signs of supernatural activity. He made his first rounds, checked the doors, and settled into the security office with a thermos of coffee and a paperback novel he'd been trying to finish for weeks. But at 11:15 p.m., every rule was triggered simultaneously. It started with the temperature plummeting so fast that frost formed on the security office windows. The smell of coal smoke flooded the building so thick that Marcus could taste it in the back of his throat. His radio erupted with static, and through the white noise he could hear dozens of voices speaking at once, passengers calling out arrivals and departures, conductors announcing, "All aboard," and underneath it all, a woman weeping. Marcus grabbed the rule sheet, but his flashlight flickered and died. The emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made the shadows dance and shift like living things. On his security monitor, all 8 camera feeds showed different eras of the station's history. Platform 2 in the 1940s, with passengers in period dress. The waiting room in the 1960s, filled with families carrying vintage suitcases. The main entrance in the 1970s, with the original neon sign flickering. But there was a 9th camera feed now, just as rule number 5 warned against. It showed the security office from an impossible angle from behind Marcus's chair, and in the feed, he could see a figure standing directly behind him. Marcus spun around, but the office was empty. When he looked back at the monitor, the figure was gone. But now all 9 feeds showed the same thing, the main platform at night, crowded with passengers from different time periods, all waiting for the same train. The phantom locomotive's whistle echoed through the station, and this time it wasn't distant. It was pulling into platform 1 brakes, squealing as it came to a stop. Through the office window, Marcus could see the train clearly for the first time, a massive steam engine that seemed to be made of shadows and starlight pulling passenger cars that flickered between different decades of design. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss and passengers began to disembark. But these weren't the usual ghostly figures Marcus had grown accustomed to. These passengers were solid real, their footsteps echoing off the concrete platforms. They moved with purpose, some heading for the exits, others taking seats on benches, all of them talking in the overlapping conversations of people who had been traveling together for far too long. A conductor stepped off the train wearing a navy blue uniform with brass buttons that caught the red emergency lighting. He was tall and gaunt, with skin that looked like old parchment and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. In his hand, he carried a brass lantern that cast no shadows. Marcus knew he should follow rule number 6, never follow anyone wearing a conductor's uniform, but the conductor wasn't asking to be followed. He was walking directly toward the security office with the measured pace of someone who had all the time in the world. Marcus frantically tried his radio, his cell phone, even the old landline in the office, but nothing worked. The conductor's footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, slow and deliberate, accompanied by the sound of his lantern tapping against the wall. The door handle turned. Marcus had locked the door. He was certain he had locked it, but the handle turned anyway, and the door swung open to reveal the conductor standing in the threshold. Up close, Marcus could see that the man's uniform was decades old, probably from the 1940s, and stained with something that looked like oil, but smelled like copper. "Ticket, please," the conductor said, his voice like steam escaping from a broken pipe. "I don't have a ticket," Marcus whispered. The conductor smiled, revealing teeth that were the color of old brass. "Everyone has a ticket. Some people just don't know where they put it." He stepped into the office, and the temperature dropped another 20 degrees. The lantern's light cast everything in sepia tones, making the modern office equipment look ancient and dusty. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could smell his own fear sweat mixing with the copper scent that emanated from the conductor. "I work here," Marcus said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "I'm security." "Security," the conductor repeated as if testing the word. "Interesting. Do you know what you're securing this place against?" Before Marcus could answer, the conductor reached into his jacket and pulled out a brass pocket watch. The face was cracked and the hands spun wildly, as if time itself was broken in this man's presence. "The last train is leaving soon," the conductor said. "It only comes once every 7 years, give or take. Picks up all the stragglers, all the ones who've been waiting too long. Your predecessor chose to board. Very peaceful, very final. No more night shifts, no more rules to follow." Marcus thought of the 4th security guard Dale had mentioned, the one who'd been found in the morning, but wasn't right after that. The one who kept talking about passengers still waiting. "What happens if I don't board?" Marcus asked. The conductor's smile widened. "Nothing. You continue your shifts, follow your rules, watch the passengers come and go. But every night will be like this one, every single night, until you decide you've had enough." Through the office window, Marcus could see the passengers boarding the phantom train. Some moved eagerly as if they'd been waiting decades for this moment. Others hesitated at the doors, looking back at the station with expressions of profound loss. "You see, this station serves a very special route," the conductor continued. "It connects the world of the living to the world of the departed. Most train stations just move people from place to place. This one moves them from existence to existence. The passengers you've been seeing, they're not ghosts. They're souls in transit, waiting for their final connection." The conductor checked his broken watch again. "But sometimes the system breaks down. Sometimes passengers miss their trains, get lost in the connections, end up stranded between destinations. This place collects them, holds them until the last train comes to take them home. And the guards maintain the balance. Keep the passengers calm, follow the rules that prevent incidents. But eventually every guard realizes that the only way to truly end their shift is to board the last train themselves." Marcus looked out at the platform again. The train was nearly full now, but there were still dozens of passengers waiting. He could see the woman in 1940s clothing the businessman in the 1960s, suit the elderly man in overalls. All of them were looking toward the security office waiting. "Choose quickly," the conductor said. "The last train doesn't wait, and it won't return for another 7 years." The train's whistle blew again, long and mournful, and Marcus realized he was standing at the crossroads of his entire existence. Behind the conductor, the phantom passengers pressed against the office windows, their faces pale and desperate. Some were crying. Others were smiling with the serene expression of people who had finally found peace. Marcus thought about his life, the dead-end job, the empty apartment, the parents who had moved away, the friends who had stopped calling. He thought about spending the next 7 years following rules that grew longer and more complex each month, watching lost souls board phantom trains while he remained trapped between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He thought about Dale's haunted expression, about previous guards who had quit or suffered breakdowns. And he thought about the guard who had chosen to board the last train, who had found his own kind of peace. The conductor extended his hand. "Your ticket, if you please." Marcus stared at the conductor's outstretched hand for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. The phantom train's whistle was growing more urgent, and through the office windows he could see the last few passengers boarding. The woman in 1940s clothing paused at the train door and looked back at him one final time, her expression no longer menacing but almost pleading. "I need more time," Marcus said finally. The conductor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, disappointment maybe, or understanding. "Time is a luxury none of us can afford indefinitely. But I understand the reluctance to leave the familiar even when the familiar has become a prison." He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small brass token tarnished with age. "This will buy you a reprieve. 7 more years of normal shifts, normal rules. The passengers will return to their usual patterns, and you can continue your work here undisturbed. But when the last train returns..." He left the sentence unfinished. Marcus took the token. It was warm to the touch and surprisingly heavy for its size. As soon as his fingers closed around it, the temperature in the office began to return to normal, and the oppressive weight of supernatural presence started to lift. 7 years, the conductor repeated. "Use them wisely." He turned and walked back toward the platform, his lantern swinging gently at his side. Marcus followed him to the office door and watched as the conductor boarded the phantom train. The engine released a final blast of steam, and the locomotive began to move, picking up speed as it headed into the darkness beyond the station. Within minutes, the train was gone, taking with it the phantom passengers, the sound of otherworldly conversations, and the smell of coal smoke. The emergency lighting shut off, and the station's normal fluorescent fixtures flickered back to life. On the security monitor, all 9 camera feeds disappeared, replaced by the usual 8 views of empty platforms and corridors. Marcus slumped against the doorframe, the brass token still clutched in his fist. His radio crackled to life, and Dale's voice came through clearly. "Marcus? You there, kid? Sorry, radio's been acting up all night." "I'm here," Marcus replied, surprised by how normal his voice sounded. "Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. As Marcus made his remaining rounds that night, he could feel the difference in the station. The supernatural presence was gone, but in its place was something almost worse. A profound emptiness, like a theater after the last performance has ended. The building felt abandoned in a way it never had before, as if its true purpose had been temporarily suspended. When Dale arrived at 6 a.m., he took one look at Marcus and nodded slowly. "You saw the conductor?" It wasn't a question. Marcus pulled out this brass token and showed it to the older man. Dale's expression grew grim. 7 years, Dale said. "That's what my predecessor got, and the one before him." "How long have you been here?" 32 years, kid. I've seen 4 last trains come and go. Each time the guard has to make the same choice you made tonight." Dale poured himself coffee with hands that were steadier than Marcus had ever seen them. "The smart ones take the token. The desperate ones board the train. What happens to the ones who board?" Dale was quiet for a long moment. "They find peace, I think. Real peace. No more night shifts, no more rules, no more watching lost souls wander platforms for decades. But they also stop being themselves. They become part of something larger, older. Part of the system that keeps places like this running." Marcus looked down at the token in his palm. 7 years felt like a lifetime, but it also felt like a blink of an eye. And after 7 years, another choice. Same options, but by then you'll understand the weight of them better. Dale finished his coffee and stood up. Some guards use those 7 years to find a replacement train someone new to take over. Others spend the time trying to understand what this place really is, what purpose it serves. A few just try to forget what they've seen and live normal lives during the day. What would you do? Dale smiled sadly. Kid, I made my choice 32 years ago. Took the token 4 times, watched 4 last trains leave without me. But the 5th time, he gestured around the empty station. Let's just say some of us are too stubborn to know when to quit. As Marcus drove home that morning, the brass token heavy in his pocket, he found himself thinking about the passengers he'd seen boarding the Phantom train. Their faces had shown relief, resignation, and something that might have been joy. They had looked like people who had finally found the strength to let go of whatever had been keeping them tethered to the world of the living. But Marcus wasn't ready to let go, not yet. He had 7 years to figure out what that meant. 6 years, 11 months, and 29 days after the last train's departure, Marcus Chen had settled into a routine that almost felt normal. The supernatural activity at Bellmont Station had returned to its regular patterns, phantom sounds once or twice a week, occasional glimpses of passengers from decades past, the usual unexplained cold spots and moving shadows. He'd even managed to update Dale's rule list, adding 3 new guidelines based on encounters with entities that seemed drawn to the station during the 7-year quiet period. Marcus had used his time well. He'd researched the station's history exhaustively, documenting every unexplained death and disappearance connected to the location. He'd tracked down the families of previous security guards, trying to understand what had happened to the ones who'd boarded the last train. Most importantly, he'd trained his replacement, a young woman named Sarah, who reminded him of himself 7 years earlier, desperate for steady work and willing to overlook the station's strange reputation. But tonight was different. Tonight, Marcus could smell coal smoke in the air, and the temperature had been dropping steadily since sunset. The last train was coming right on schedule, and Marcus thought he was ready for it. He sat in the security office, the brass token on the desk in front of him, waiting. Sarah was in the break room reading through the updated rule list one final time. In a few hours, Marcus would either hand her the master keys and walk away from Bellmont Station forever, or he would board a phantom locomotive and find out what lay at the end of a journey that had no earthly destination. At 11:47 p.m., the fluorescent light above Platform 3 flickered twice, and Marcus knew his 7 years were over. But this time, something was different. As the Phantom train pulled into the station, Marcus noticed that the passenger cars were nearly empty. Only a handful of souls stood on the platforms, and most of them were people Marcus recognized, passengers who had been haunting the station for decades, finally ready to complete their journeys. The conductor stepped off the train, still carrying his brass lantern, still wearing the same stained uniform. But when he looked at Marcus, his expression was almost apologetic. 7 years, the conductor said. You've served well. I'm ready, Marcus replied, though he wasn't sure if that was entirely true. The conductor shook his head. No, Mr. Chen, I don't think you are. He reached into his jacket and pulled out another brass token identical to the one Marcus had carried for 7 years. This station has become something of a puzzle for my employers. Usually guards serve for 7-year periods and then choose their fate. But this place, it's been operating with the same core staff for over 3 decades. Marcus thought of Dale, who had been at the station for 32 years, who had taken the token 5 times. Dale never told you his real story, did he? The conductor continued. He wasn't just a maintenance supervisor when he started here. He was the night guard, just like you. Took the token 5 times, watched 5 last trains leave without him. But on the 6th visit, something unprecedented happened. He chose to stay not as a passenger, but as part of the station's permanent staff. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. Dale wasn't just the maintenance supervisor. He was the guardian of Bellmont Station, the one who ensured that the supernatural railroad continued to function. He had given up his chance at eternal peace to become something else entirely. A caretaker for lost souls, a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The position comes with certain compensations, the conductor said. Extended life immunity to the usual effects of prolonged exposure to supernatural phenomena and the ability to help souls find their way home. But it also comes with responsibilities that last far longer than 7 years. Marcus looked through the office window at the phantom train. The few remaining passengers were boarding now, and he could see the relief on their faces as they finally found seats for the journey they'd been waiting decades to take. Sarah appeared in the hallway, drawn by the sounds and lights, her face pale with a mixture of fear and fascination. What happens to her if I take Dale's position? She becomes the new night guard, follows the rules, maintains the balance, chooses her own fate when the time comes. The cycle continues as it must. Marcus picked up the new brass token. It was identical to the first one, but somehow it felt heavier, as if it carried the weight of all the decisions he would have to make over the coming decades. And if I board the train, peace, rest, an end to all questions and responsibilities. But Bellmont Station will need a new guardian in that process. It's not always smooth. Sometimes stations like this one go dark for years while the bureaucracy of the afterlife sorts itself out. The souls who depend on this place to find their way home would be left stranded. The phantom train's whistle blew, and Marcus realized that he wasn't just choosing his own fate. He was choosing the fate of everyone who would ever need Bellmont Station services, the lost souls, the confused spirits, the ones who died with unfinished business and needed a way to move on. He thought about Dale's haunted expression about 32 years of night shifts and supernatural encounters. But he also thought about the passengers he'd seen board the phantom trains over the years, the relief and peace on their faces as they finally found their way home. Marcus pocketed the second brass token and looked at the conductor. "Where do I sign up?" The conductor smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had ever seen from him. "Welcome to the permanent staff, Mr. Chen. Mr. Morrison will be along shortly to begin your training." As the phantom train pulled away from the platform for the last time in Marcus's tenure as night guard, he felt something fundamental shift inside him. The world looked the same, but he could sense layers of existence he'd never perceived before, the faint trails left by departing souls, the electromagnetic signatures of supernatural phenomena, the vast network of stations and waypoints that connected the world of the living to whatever lay beyond. Sarah knocked on the office door, her face pale but determined. "Marcus, what just happened out there?" Marcus handed her the master keys and the original rule list, now updated with 7 years of additional experience. "Congratulations," he said. "You've been promoted to night security. I'll be taking over as your supervisor." As Sarah settled into the security office for her first real shift, Marcus walked the platforms that would be his responsibility for the foreseeable future. He could sense the presence of souls who were still in transit, still trying to find their way to the right connections. Some had been waiting for decades, others had just arrived. But for the first time since he'd started working at Bellmont Station, Marcus felt like he truly understood his purpose. He wasn't just a security guard following mysterious rules. He was a conductor of sorts, helping lost souls find their way to destinations that existed beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. And somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of another train approaching. There was always another train approaching. The work never ended, but Marcus was beginning to think that might not be such a bad thing after all.